Great. Well, I think we'll get started now. Okay. And I want to welcome our attendees to our series called The Justice System in Psychiatry. And we are very fortunate and we express our gratitude to Justice Stratton and our team here, Dr. Wood and Judge Loxley. We are very grateful that you're able to join us today. The focus of our presentation today for Grand Rounds is going to be on the veteran population. And I'm going to turn things over to Justice Stratton with, again, our gratitude for your efforts in educating us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we are very happy to be back at OSU once again. And hopefully this recording will then go to other schools of psychiatry and training hospitals. And eventually they get to all the law deans. I send them to all the law deans as well to use in their criminal justice programs. And our goal here is to give you sort of a basic education, a basic touch base on different issues related to mental illness and criminal justice. And this is our fourth one. We did one on mental health courts, which many of you may have attended. We did one on the crisis intervention teams where officers are trained to appropriately respond to a mental health call. The third one was on the probate issues, commitment, insanity, things like that. And this fourth one, we're focusing on veterans because veterans are a very unique population and they really have very different issues and needs. And some of you who are in school might be veterans yourself or have family members who are veterans. So this is kind of our background, and we're very grateful to have two really good experts in their field flesh out kind of my general opening comments to you. Ohio has the 6th largest veterans population. That's because we have several large bases. We have a very active Ohio National Guard. It's a nice place to settle and raise a family, so many come here and stay. But that also creates challenges because that means we have a lot of veterans who are going to have issues. And throughout history, the injuries that are caused by the war that are mental issues, not just physical issues, have been given different names. Way back in 1656, the Swiss called it nostalgia. The Spanish called it broken. In World War II, it was called combat stress, or World War I. In World War II, it was called combat fatigue or soldier's heart. Now we recognize it as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or some people just like to call it post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury, which is finally actually being recognized. When I first started working in this field, we didn't even really recognize TBI for football players or hockey players, and now we understand it's a very serious issue. Well, it's a serious issue with the military because of the heavy use in these last several wars of IEDs, explosive devices that put a shockwave through the whole brain system and cause some tremendous damage that is very difficult to deal with. It looks sometimes like PTSD. Almost everybody that has a TBI has PTSD because they got it in a very traumatic event, but it takes a lot different to really try to treat it. They estimate right now there are 500,000 to 600,000 vets in the United States that are suffering from PTSD, and there's anywhere from 320 to 420 who are suffering from traumatic brain injury. That's a tremendous burden for us, and it leads to all sorts of consequences that Dr. Wood and Judge Loxley will talk about. And then there's depression that comes out of this, and a very good article in the Dispatch, and maybe your Dr. Nedemeyer can find it and send it around to the students on moral injury, the guilt and the survival guilt and the traumatic stuff you feel that you feel like you can't quite deal with the fact that you had to kill somebody. Very good article about that, and it features Eric Sowers, who's actually was a peer mentor in charge of peer mentoring court at the Delaware Veterans Court and is now in the School of School of Social Work, working on a master's. Suicide is a huge issue. We had about 7,800 die in a 20-year period from our different conflicts, Afghanistan, Iraq, the 6-week war, et cetera. Over that same period, we had over 200,000 veterans commit suicide, far number that ever went through death in a war. And we just had a very major veteran suicide conference put on where the statistic was where I heard and was just astounded by it and what it might mean. So I come from a long line of veterans. My father was in World War II. He was a bomb demolition expert and fortunately survived. My 5 uncles were in the different theaters and fortunately all lived. My grandfather was unfortunately killed in World War II. I had 2 brothers that served in the Vietnam War era. And and I grew up in Thailand. I was a missionary kid, and I went to boarding school in South Vietnam during the Vietnam War. So I saw war up close and personal, and almost all the Americans I knew, besides the missionaries, were we call them GIs there, were active military. And occasionally my father would take us to the military base in Udon, where we lived, and he would speak at the chapel, and then we would eat at the officers' mess. And it's the only time I ever had beef. We didn't have cows in Thailand, so I didn't have beef then. But I came to America when I was 18, and I didn't have any money, but I managed to work my way through and eventually got appointed and then elected 3 times to the Ohio Supreme Court. And I became very interested when I was a trial judge in mental health courts. Didn't know anything about mental health issues, never saw it in Thailand growing up, really didn't see it in college, although I know it's very prevalent now. First saw it when I was a trial judge, and I had so many people in my court that had mental health and alcohol and drug issues, and often together. And so I became very active in trying to start mental health courts and get officers trained in crisis intervention response techniques to know how to answer one of these calls. And as a result of that, I gave a speech in Washington, DC one day, and a person from the VA said they wanted to start veterans courts. And I never heard of that. I heard of a mental health court and drug court. And I said, is that like the benefits appeals court? And he said, no, it's a treatment court. And I said, well, that's basically a mental health or a drug court with a vet in it. And actually a veterans treatment court has both elements. So a bunch of us were asked to go to Washington to put on a conference for the brass to convince them that they wanted to invest in this, which they did. And then I was part of a committee that the VA set up, and we went to Washington and we planned a program called Veterans Justice Outreach Specialists. Basically, a VJO is assigned to every major hospital system, VA hospital system, and their goal is to connect with veterans entering the criminal justice system and get them connected with services right away. It has been a huge success, a major program. As a result of VJOs, many more courts got set up, veterans treatment courts got set up. I was part of a training program to teach them to understand the court system, basic 101 courts, so they knew how to interact with the judges and probation officers, because the VA was mostly in the prison system and helping them come out of prison. And there the structure is very different. The prison warden pretty much controls what happens. In a trial court setting, the judge controls what happens, not the jail. And the judge dictates what's going to have what treatment. So getting the judge involved very early is extremely important. I'm proud to say that Ohio now has 24 veterans courts. Judge Loxley is one of our fearless leaders and heads our Attorney General Task Force on Veterans Treatment Courts. Nationally, there are up to, as of November, 601 veterans treatment courts, and a lot of courts now practice the same principles without necessarily being a treatment court in a full capacity. About 5 years ago, I interested Justice Kennedy in the veterans issue. She had been a former police officer before she became a judge, and she really ran with it. She got very interested in it. We partnered on a lot of things. She visited a lot of courts to try to interest them in becoming veterans treatment courts. And now she has just been elected our new Chief Justice. And tomorrow we are putting on our 8th Veterans Court. I put 4 veterans conferences on when I was on the Supreme Court. I just found out that everybody was doing something with veterans and nobody knew what anyone else was doing. The Department of Mental Health had a program, the Department of Drug and Alcohol, Department of Education, none of it was connected. So I did sort of 4 connect the dots. And then Justice Kennedy and I have put on 3 more. And this one now for tomorrow is on, it's called Lean Forward Healing and Recovery. And we're going to be focusing on post-traumatic stress disorder, TBI, all the Ohio Cares programs. A special program that's really going to be interesting is a alternate therapy, like using horse therapy or yoga or dog therapy, that our Veterans Court judges are going to be presenting on. So what can you do as a student? If you are a veteran, you can very much get involved. Veterans treatment courts really need veterans mentors. They are the most important part of a veterans court, to be a mentor to a vet, to help them to the system, someone they can turn to and help guide them. And Judge Loxley can tell you a little bit more about the effectiveness of that. So in Columbus, there's a very robust veterans court that you can get involved in. Or if this goes to other schools of psychiatry, almost all of your major jurisdictions have veterans treatment courts. You can understand and learn more about how treatment differs from other mental illnesses, that when you add the components of the war and the stress and the TBI, there are different treatments that are necessary. Maybe if you've got a family friend or a member that you can recognize, and try to seek help for them. And I'll put up 2 slides now that are going to be in your materials that will be sent to you. There are a lot of resources available for veterans. There's a lot of justice programs. This describes the Veterans Justice Outreach Program. There's lots of resources listed on the bottom. It gives you some more specifics on how you can get involved and be helpful. And in the next slide, it talks about jobs for vets. There's a very special program just focusing on veterans. If you go to a Job and Family Services Center, they can help you with resumes and regular things. If you're a veteran, you can go to the next desk. And if you've got special issues, you've got a criminal background, you've got disabilities, this program can really help you find that employment. And so it's very important that you understand that there are resources out there, and you don't know where it's going to pop up or where it's going to happen. Last year, I do part-time work. I'm an appellate coach, basically telling people how to file briefs and how to appeal cases at the Ohio Supreme Court. And I do it with the Voorhees, Sador, Seymour and Peace law firm. And I sent out to my law firm a notice of the Veterans Conference last year, because we offer free continuing legal education when we do these programs. And it was very sad. I received a return email from one of our partners who said her father had been in the Vietnam War, and he had committed suicide after he retired, which is something we're finding, that a lot of veterans, once they quiet their minds and they're done working and now the demons come back, that there's an increase among older veterans who retire in suicide. And I had no idea, she had no idea he had these demons. And so she wanted to come to the conference to try to understand. So you don't know, you have to ask if any of your family members or friends, what they need. Are they suffering? Can you help them? So that's just a little background about how I got into this area, my passion for it. I left the bench almost 10 years ago now, because I really wanted to focus on mental health and criminal justice issues and veterans issues. And so I work on several programs, many of which we've talked about in the last programs that we've put on, but veterans remains a very major passion of mine. And now that Kennedy is Chief Justice, she is going to certainly be doing more things in leadership to help with the veterans issues and raise awareness of treatment and other issues. So I'm very honored that OSU has hosted us. We are very excited that this will be sent to other schools of psychiatry and training hospitals and hopefully law schools. And we hope that you can take lessons learned, use these resources we give you, and do something to help your fellow veteran. I kind of want to finish with one statement someone made to me once that really was profound. They said, a person who enters the military is someone who gives the government a blank check that up to and including their life. When you think of how profound that is and how important that is to protect our country and keep us safe, growing up overseas and watching democracy crumble and communists take over, I can tell you our military are really vital to our living the free life that we live. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rita Wood. She also co-chairs the Veterans Committee with Judge Loxley, and she has been a great partner, very involved in a lot of things that we work on together. And she's going to talk about some of the medical sides, and then we will turning it over to Judge Loxley to talk about what we are doing with veterans treatment courts from someone who's boots on the ground and has done it. So Dr. Wood, thank you again once more for helping us out, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Justice Stratton. I appreciate it. If we could go to the next slide, please. So this is the things that we're going to be discussing today. We're going to be looking at the common mental health diagnoses that I've seen in veterans, some of the comorbidities that go along with those diagnoses, listing some of the evidence-based therapies that we use to treat veterans, and the resources available. And the resources I list at the end can be used by veterans, family members, providers, people within the VA, people outside the VA. If you could go to the next slide, please. So I've worked in the VA system for over 14 years. These are some of the diagnoses I've seen during my time within the VA. Of course, the most common are anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of the other disorders, the bipolar 1 and 2, and the seriously mentally ill, the schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder, I've also seen. It's been pretty common, especially in the older veterans. Depressive disorder due to another general medical condition is one that is coming up more frequently. As a lot of our Vietnam veterans are aging, that is very common diagnosis. They're used to being independent problem solvers, doing things on their own. And as their medical issues are starting to take over, they're not able to be as independent. And it's very difficult for them to adjust and to adapt to others, needing others to do things for them. Some of my veterans with schizophrenia, they talk about what it was like for them in the late 70s, early 80s, hallucinating, starting to have visual and auditory hallucinations while being in the military, and having to spend months in a military hospital before being discharged. And at that time, not as many treatments existed for seriously mentally ill at that time, so they weren't always treated very well. Next slide, please. So this is some of the other comorbid diagnoses that go along with the primary mental health diagnosis. Traumatic brain injury, as Justice Stratton talked about, that's usually associated with combat veterans. They've had IEDs, they've been attacked, but also that occurs with veterans who are in non-combat zones. A veteran who has experienced military sexual trauma may have been brutalized during their attack and suffered a TBI. There are veterans who are doing military exercises and there may be a vehicular accident. There was one veteran who talked about recently jumping out of a plane and hitting their head on the side of the plane when they were parachuting and suffering a traumatic brain injury. Cognitive impairment is not as common. There was a veteran who suffered a stroke while working out and then was never the same again because he had several strokes afterwards. Military sexual trauma is often associated with female veterans, but that's not the case. There are many male veterans who have also experienced it, but it's not as common for them to come forward because they're ashamed of that. They're ashamed of other male veterans victimizing them. Substance use disorder is a huge one. Marijuana and alcohol tend to be the most common. Opiates are another common one, but also methamphetamines. Pain disorder. Now, the veterans who may have been in combat or in non-combat, if they were in an accident, they may have been hurt. Their backpacks that they carry on missions or on exercises are over 60 pounds, and some of them suffer back injuries because of doing that kind of work, carrying that kind of load. I think of a veteran that I treated previously who he had a traumatic brain injury, he had a pain disorder, and he also had PTSD. What had happened is he was over in a combat zone. There was a convoy that was out and the vehicle in front of them was attacked by an IED, and those soldiers died. And the other ones got in an accident because of that explosion. And so he suffered hip problems. He had a brain injury from that accident, PTSD, And he also had guilt about him surviving and the others that he saw in front of him that died from that. So increased suicide risk is a huge thing. Justice Stratton talked about moral injury, having to take the life of someone. Oftentimes there are veterans who talk about having to kill a child that was used as a decoy or that had an explosive device that lured them into a place to be attacked. And so having to defend themselves or having to shoot women who are going to attack them, or having guilt because they survived whereas others died. Those veterans, they sometimes feel as if they're a burden on their family because of their symptoms and because of what goes on with them. And so they think suicide is the way to solve that problem. Next slide, please. So here I wanted to give an example of someone that's suffering from PTSD and TBI. If you look to the left, PTSD, what's unique to that is nightmares and flashbacks. On the other side is TBI, where it's unique to have headaches and dizziness. In the middle are the shared symptoms, the poor concentration, memory impairment, sleep disturbance, depression, anxiety, and irritability. Now, if you think of yourself and how, if you get a poor night's sleep and how you feel the next day, most of us aren't at the best. I know that I tend to be more irritable, I tend to have less patience, and I tend not to be able to deal with things as if I would if I had gotten a good night's sleep. Now, if you think of a veteran who's suffering from PTSD and TBI, them getting a good night's sleep is rare. Most of the time they have poor sleep. And so all of these factors are compounded and they have a much different experience than the rest of us. They have a lot more anger, irritability, anxiety, depression. So let's say they're having problems in their relationship, then they're more likely to be angry and lose their temper with that person. And so that can lead to problems in relationships, at work, at school, at home. Next slide, please. So here I have a slide about veterans in the legal system. There's been a lot of research done by the VA with veterans involved in the criminal justice system, and it says more than half of those veterans have a mental health disorder, a substance use disorder. And so if you think about what I'd said before, the anger, the irritability, the problems in relationships, a lot of times they're involved with the legal system because of domestic violence. Their partner calls the police because they're afraid of them, because they've become aggressive, they're intoxicated, and they're making threats of either harming themselves or someone else. Alcohol, huge problem. So if you already have problems with anger and anxiety and not trusting other people, and then you add alcohol to that, that just makes it that much worse. A lot of veterans talk about they don't like to go out to public places. If they see other people being disrespectful or acting like an idiot, they're going to speak up and say something, and that can lead to verbal altercations in the public, which may lead to the police being called. I treated a veteran before who was in a combat zone, who was a driver. And so what he was taught is if he was out driving and there was any obstacle at the side of the road, they were to get away from it and to go around, because that could be an IED, that could be an ambush point. And so they had to get away from those objects. So you have someone who's trained to look for those objects and to get as far away as possible in case it explodes. That does not go away once they come home from combat. And I've had that same veteran talk to me driving on the highway, seeing an abandoned car on the road. He sees that as a threat. He doesn't see what most of us see. That's just an abandoned car that someone left. And so he would get as far away as possible. So if you have a police officer that's sitting and waiting for someone to do a traffic violation and see someone go across the 3 lanes on the highway to get away from that car, they're thinking that person is driving erratically and may be intoxicated, where it's the veteran thinking that's a threat and I need to get as far away as possible because it may explode. So those are some of the unique things that go on in veterans' heads that need to be addressed, especially if they're involved with the legal system. Next slide, please. So here I list some of the common therapies that are used for depression: acceptance and commitment therapy, behavioral activation therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy for depression, and interpersonal therapy. So I only gave a general overview, but the link at the bottom will take you to the website where these are listed, and it will give you a much more detailed explanation about what is the difference between these therapies and how would someone choose which is the best therapy for them. Next slide, please. And this one is about PTSD, the cognitive processing therapy, prolonged exposure therapy, EMDR. Written exposure therapy is a newer one that's starting to be used at the VA, and the cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy. And that's a couples therapy that is used with a veteran that has PTSD, and helping for that couple to be able to talk about those symptoms and how it impacts their marriage. Again, there's the link at the bottom regarding these evidence-based therapies, and there's much more information on it. The VA has done a ton of research on different evidence-based therapies. I didn't want to go through and list them all. There is a lot more for others, treatments such as anxiety, serious mental illness, substance use disorder. And so you can go take time to look at those websites at your leisure and find out more information on them. Next slide, please. And here I list some common government resources for helping to treat veterans. As I mentioned previously, anybody can go to these websites and get the information. Number 5 actually is the most interesting and best for veterans themselves. This is a bunch of videos and information about veterans talking about their symptoms, what it was like for them prior to treatment, what made them decide to get treatment, and how they benefited from that treatment. There is still a stigma about mental health treatment and illness. People don't want to talk about it. They're ashamed about it. Also, especially our Vietnam veterans, they're not very trusting of the government. And so even though I'm a therapist, I'm still represent the government in their eyes, and they're really not trusting of mental health therapists. And so this is a way to connect veterans, for them to see what other veterans have gone through, because they always talk about others just don't understand. I need another veteran who's went through something similar that understands me and understands what's happened. And this is a way to get them that information so that they can hear from others who've had similar experiences. Unfortunately, within the military, mental health providers aren't looked on very well. They're called wizards, which is not a good indication. What it means is if something is wrong with you and you are not doing well, they make you disappear. And what that means is that if they're found to have PTSD, something that interferes with their ability to stay in the military, they're then medically discharged. So there is a lot of distrust with mental health providers, and I would keep that in mind if you are going to work with veterans in the future. And that is all I had. And so I will turn it over to my colleague, Judge Loxley, to talk about veterans treatment courts.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Judge Gary Loxley, serve on the bench in the Warren County Court in Lebanon, Ohio. I should mention at the outset that I established and started Warren County Veterans Treatment Court here in 2015, and I currently preside over its sessions. Just earlier this morning, we had Veterans Court in our jurisdiction. I'm going to be speaking about one of the court system solutions in dealing with veterans who are suffering from some reason or more than one reason that has caused them to find their way into the criminal justice system, and that is the Veterans Treatment Court, or VTC for short. My presentation will introduce you to the definition of VTCs, explain their purpose, review membership of the treatment team, veterans' eligibility to participate in the program, and the services provided, and other aspects of the VTC program. Next slide, please. VTCs have been around for about 14 years. The first was established in Buffalo, New York in 2008. The first one in Ohio was in Mansfield in 2009. A VTC docket is a docket separate from the regular court. The VTC is convened in the same location, oftentimes the same courtroom. as the regular docket, but the BTC meets at a time different from all other hearings. A BTC is known as the specialized docket because its focus is on veterans and issues that veterans have encountered. Now, I mentioned the term specialized docket. The Supreme Court here in Ohio set up the specialized docket section in 2015, and that section establishes a uniform minimum criteria for all specialized dockets to meet before they can be approved and then designate themselves as a specialized docket. Now, one feature of the BTC is that it's non-adversarial in nature, and that's an important concept. Whereas disposition of cases maybe on the regular docket is primarily focused on the principles of sentencing, such as general deterrence, specific deterrence, retribution, restitution, and rehabilitation. The BTC's focus is on rehabilitation, and for this reason, it is non-adversarial in nature. The judge engages the veteran in a more collegial nature than would ordinarily be seen on the regular docket. Next slide, please. As the name suggests, BTCs are set up for those who have served in the military or those who are currently serving in the military. A veteran can be someone who served in any branch of the military or for one enlistment or one tour or several enlistments or years of service. Some might have spent a career of 20 or more years in the service, and others may be serving in a unit currently in the reserves or the National Guard, so they are continuing to serve in the military. Now, BTCs are based on a premise that a veteran will more likely succeed in the program if other veterans are participating. The shared military experience of these veterans acts to bind them together and to support each other to succeed in the program. This works even if the veterans are serving in different branches or have served in different branches of the armed forces, served at different times or different periods of this country's history, or in a combat or a non-combat zone. An important aspect of the BTC is it's a voluntary program. Nobody is requiring the veteran to participate in this program whatsoever. The veteran is offered the opportunity to have their term of probation supervised by the BTC court. It's also self-paced. Each BTC establishes its own standards, but usually the minimum duration is 1 year to 1.5 years. The maximum supervision time for the BTC is limited by the duration of regular probation in Ohio, which is 5 years. Now, the purpose of the BTC program is to identify the underlying reasons for the misconduct in the first place, with the goal of rehabilitating the veteran so they will no longer be in that court or any other court system. Studies show and indicate that veterans who graduate from the BTC are less likely to return to the criminal justice system than others who participated in standard or traditional programs. And in meeting this goal, the BTC saves time, money, effort, and incarceration space in local jails or prisons. Typically, BTCs are more demanding than traditional probation programs. For example, veterans report to their probation officer more often. They appear before the BTC judge much more frequently, and they undergo random urinalysis testing more frequently than regular probationers. Even though the program is more demanding, the veteran knows and understands that they are volunteering for the program because they understand the military setting and believe the additional demands are more likely to lead to a successful result. Veterans have what I call, quote, redeeming qualities, unquote. They've met the moral, educational, and physical criteria for joining the military in the first place, and they know how to follow rules, regulations, and they are amenable to supervision. But they've fallen off the wagon, so to speak, and that they need help. Next slide, please. The treatment team is on this slide, and the treatment team of the BTC meets and discusses each case privately outside the hearing of the public or any of the veterans to establish a treatment plan for the veteran, review progress, and determine the next step in the veteran's advancement in the program. And since the veteran is required to sign a release of information as a prerequisite to participate in the program, the treatment team has access to all of the medical and military records pertaining to that veteran. The composition of the BTC varies by jurisdiction. In other words, there's no set number that must be present on any particular BTC treatment team. But as you can see from the slide, a common treatment team includes the following. First off is the judge. The judge heads the team, leads the discussion, makes decisions. The judge can be described maybe as the manager or coach of the team. It's important to note, too, that the judge does not have to be a veteran himself or herself. It helps, but it's certainly not necessary to head a VTC court. Next is a program manager. This person serves kind of as the office manager for the treatment team. This person maintains all governing documents for the VTC program, including the participation agreement, policies and procedures, program description, and so forth. This person acts as a liaison between the specialized docket section of the Supreme Court and the VTC court. This person is responsible for keeping abreast of the changes and keeping information current to all members of the treatment team. Also included regularly are the probation officer and sometimes a probation clerk. These individuals provide intensive supervision over the veteran. They are really the nuts and bolts of the supervision of the veteran, not unlike regular docket cases, but they certainly act with more frequency and with supervision from the VTC treatment team and judge. The probation officer provides valuable information and no-nonsense feedback to the treatment team about the veteran's progress so that decisions can be made for the benefit of the veteran. The next one is the Veterans Justice Outreach Coordinator. You heard about this a moment ago from Justice Stratton. The Veterans Justice Outreach Coordinator position was founded, it's about 12 or 13 years ago now. They identify justice-oriented veterans and link them to programs at the earliest possible point. They create partnerships with the VA and the criminal justice system, and certainly this person is an invaluable member of the treatment team. Once an individual is identified as being interested in the program, the VJO performs an assessment of the veteran, determines their eligibility for VA services, and then ultimately links those individuals who are eligible for VA services with those appropriate services. The VJO also provides updates during the treatment team meetings on the progress of the veteran, real-time connection to the veteran's charts, records, appointments, and treatment programs. But I think it's also important to know, just because the VJO is employed by the Department of Veterans Affairs, that person nor the VA does not determine which veterans should be admitted to the VTC. The VA also does not define the level of offenses that the VTC will accept. That's up to the VTC itself and the supervising judge. The prosecutor and defense counsel are also invited to participate and become standing members of the treatment team. Prosecutor identifies veterans whose cases may be coming up for disposition, and the public defender ensures representation if necessary. Every once in a while, the public defender's client is a veteran and is actually in the program himself. The Veterans Defense Counsel is invited to attend, but in my experience, they rarely do if they are retained counsel. The County Veterans Services Commission liaison is also a member of the team. Each county in Ohio has a Veterans Services Commission that provides emergency food, clothing, and shelter and other services like filing of claims or providing transportation door to door for medical appointments and counseling and the like to the veteran. This liaison, as part of the team, links county benefits to the veteran as needed. Again, Justice Stratton mentioned this individual before as a peer mentor, but we have a peer mentor coordinator. This is a unique aspect of VTCs in that they have what are known as peer mentors, and the coordinator actually coordinates, as you might imagine, the peer mentors assigned to the court. Peer mentors are honorably discharged veterans from the community who have the time and are willing to volunteer to assist their fellow veterans in completing the VTC program. Although peer mentors are not members of the treatment team, the coordinator of these peer mentors is. The peer mentor coordinator is usually the first contact as a prospective peer mentor might have with the VTC, and that person is explaining and introducing the VTC program to the prospective peer mentor and assigns then ultimately a peer mentor to each veteran. Training as a peer mentor is minimal, but there is some online training that's provided by the Attorney General's office. Obviously, the peer mentor has to demonstrate that he or she is an honorably discharged veteran, and then it goes through a background check before they are approved as peer mentors in the program. And as an aside, if anyone listening is a veteran and has time to serve as a peer mentor, or perhaps may know someone who is a veteran, please contact your local jurisdiction. Franklin County Municipal Court was mentioned earlier, and other jurisdictions, major jurisdictions, have veterans treatment courts in their areas as well. Peer mentors are valuable pieces to the VTC program and are certainly in high demand. Next slide, please. Eligibility for the veteran to participate is covered by this slide. VTCs establish their own exclusions and disqualifiers, such as the levels and types of criminal offenses, less than honorable discharges, for example. I can give you an example. A veteran with a sexual assault or sex offense charge or conviction may be ineligible under the rules established by the court. Some courts do not consider veterans who are charged or have committed crimes of violence. At the common police court level, most courts exclude high-level felonies, and it varies jurisdiction by jurisdiction. I've mentioned here this concept of military service versus veteran, and it may interest you to know that studies show that often a veteran is shy or quiet about his or her service. Many never admit to serving in the military at all. And the definition of veteran can be convoluted. It's different under state law than what it is under federal law. So rather than asking some person whether or not they are a veteran, and they might take the technical way out and say, no, I'm not a veteran, not knowing whether or not they've ever served in the military, I think the better question is, have you ever served in the military? And it's up to the individual to decide whether or not to answer that with a yes or no. I should mention too that courts in Ohio are required to consider whether a defendant has ever served in the military for sentencing purposes. Now, I mentioned earlier that participation in a VTC is voluntary, and the different types of voluntary participation include a couple of different ones, which I'll review now. The first two must be offered by the state and then approved by the court. They are known as intervention in lieu of conviction and pretrial diversion. Intervention in lieu of conviction is a statute in Ohio that determines the criteria: low-level felonies, a felony of the 4th or 5th degree, no felony sex offense, no mandatory prison involved in the charge. And this is at the common pleas court level. Usually it's associated with drug, alcohol use, intellectual disability, mental illness being a, quote, leading factor, unquote, under the statute. Under this program, if it's offered and the court approves, the veteran waives his or her right to a speedy trial, pleads guilty, but then the court holds any findings in abeyance, stays the proceedings, and then set forth conditions that the veteran must comply with for successful completion of the intervention in lieu of conviction program. And that would include then enrollment and graduation in the VTC program. At the end of all this, assuming successful graduation, the charge or the charges against the veteran are dismissed. Certainly, this is an attractive option for the veteran. A similar program is pretrial diversion. Again, that's set by statute in Ohio. It applies to any misdemeanor or the 2 low-level felonies of the felony of the 5th and felony of the 4th degrees. And also under the statute reads that the individual is likely not to offend again, or probably not offend again. Cannot be an offense of violence. No physical harm can be caused, threatened, or intended. And operating a motor vehicle under the influence is not eligible for pretrial diversion. There can also be no history of criminal misconduct. So the same result as the intervention in lieu of conviction option. There's graduation from the program results in the charge or the charges being dismissed against the veteran. That's another attractive option. Post-conviction is also a way, and that's the way it operates here in the Warren County Veterans Court. What's in it for me might be asked. Well, if the charge is not dismissed or the charges aren't dismissed, why should I even volunteer for the program? The reason why veterans do it, because it's an opportunity to participate in the program with other veterans. There's an amazing amount of camaraderie and esprit de corps that's involved with veterans. You can see it. Even someone without military experience can see it and observe it by coming and looking at the court. And it's interesting, too, that some defense attorneys will say, well, what's in it for my client? I want to try to get my client off on the least amount of supervision as possible. Well, if you invite that attorney to come in and watch, you can see why veterans volunteer for the program. It's surprising to some, but not to others, that a veteran will volunteer for the VTC program post-conviction, like I say. Unlike intervention in lieu of conviction or the pretrial diversion, the charges are not dismissed since the defendant has already been found guilty and sentenced. The veteran, however, does want to participate and knows that his or her motivation is to get the help needed to change behavior and engage in rehabilitation necessary to stay out of the criminal justice system. We currently have 15 members on our docket, and none of those members are going to get their charge or charges dismissed once they successfully complete the program. Another way is through judicial release. Voluntary participation can be had through that way. That is release from prison at the common police court level, granted by the sentencing judge, and then the defendant consents to supervision by the Veterans Treatment Court. The final bullet there on that slide is concurrent supervision. This is a relatively new concept, but through a memorandum of understanding, veterans can be identified, and then veterans can be sent from a neighboring jurisdiction or jurisdictions for supervision to the servicing Veterans Treatment Court. This is a concept that's maturing over time and may lead to more robust programs and perhaps a possibility of codifying it into law. Next slide, please. This slide discusses briefly services that are provided. Basically, it's broken down into two types. Either a person is eligible for VA benefits or the person is not. If the person is eligible for VA benefits and services, especially for medical services, that which is determined by the Department of Veterans Affairs, not by the VTC, then the VJO gets involved. Treatment plans, service providers are provided through the VA. If the veteran is eligible, the veteran's assessed, and then the treatment team comes up with the plan based upon what the VA medical professionals have devised. The VJO serves as a liaison under those cases. And then the second category is non-VA eligible. A person may have civilian medical insurance. A person may be, for example, Medicaid eligible. And we determine how to proceed based upon their eligibility for those type benefits. The court's probation officer under that scenario serves as the liaison. And I should say too, and I'll emphasize this, just because a veteran is not eligible for VA benefits does not mean that the veteran cannot participate in the VTC program. That's a misconception. Sometimes, especially civilian defense counsel who are not familiar with veterans court processes, automatically assume that, but that's not the case. And then another service is provided, goes without saying really, is a peer mentor counsel and advice. You have that peer mentor available 24/7. I require in my court, which is now in its 8th year, that the veteran have a minimum 1 time a week contact with the peer mentor. And that could be face-to-face, it could be telephonic, it could be text, email, whatever the case may be. And oftentimes we'll find that the peer mentor and the veteran establish a very nice relationship, almost to the point of being friends, not only professional colleagues, but also friends. And they'll go out fishing together and have lunch together and what have you. There's also this ability to participate in a structured environment as to the service that's provided with fellow military participants, and I've covered that before. Next slide, please. The final substantive slide is entitled Duration, Rewards, Sanctions, and Graduation. I mentioned before the duration of the VTC varies by jurisdiction. I've seen the duration as little as 6 months in duration, some at 1 year. I think a majority that I'm familiar with are 1.5 years minimum time of extensive probation and supervision by the VTC court. The maximum period, as I mentioned earlier, is 5 years based upon the maximum duration a court can have supervision over somebody under probation under Ohio law. So the rewards given to individuals, it's really only limited by your imagination. The conduct of operations of a VTC is often described as being a reflection of the personality of the supervising judge, and I do believe that that's true. Such rewards can include things like stickers or magnets, patches, gift cards, certificates, frame certificates, challenge coins, social events. Just earlier today, I gave a 50% completion certificate to one of our veterans who just finished the first 2 phases of the 4-phase program. And it's a ceremony that we conduct at the halfway point. Sanctions, on the other hand, can include administrative, things like I've had people write a composition or write a letter, give a report, perform some community service, or judicial, which would be a formal probation violation. And sometimes there are consequences of sentencing, including incarceration or local jail time. And then finally, graduation. With a ceremony. It's a formal ceremony with a speaker, and families and friends are invited, the local community is invited. That's the culmination of a successful completion of the program. It's a cause for celebration for everyone involved. It's a proud moment for the veteran and the veteran's family, but also for the peer mentor and for every member of the treatment team, including me. It's really one of the most enjoyable things I do as a judge over a VTC. I know here in the county court on Thursday mornings, I always schedule 2 weddings. That's an enjoyable thing too, but I think being a judge over a VTC ranks right up there. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation on veterans treatment courts. And I'll open the floor to any questions that you might have for any of the presenters today.
I have a question. First of all, thank you everyone for your expertise and for coming and sharing all of this. I feel it's really eye-opening for a lot of us as residents. My question becomes, with these treatment courts, which are new ideas to some of us, how do we advocate for these in more communities or other states that we may originate from? What can we do to add our voice to advocating for this?
So there is on the VA website, if you Google Veterans Treatment Courts, I believe there's even a map. There's 601 across the country, 24 in Ohio. And so you can find out if there is one in your jurisdiction or nearby that you could then contact the judge, say, hey, you're a psychiatric student, you're interested in helping, you're interested in attending, you're interested in getting involved. That's a great way to do it. And then another way to do it is to join the, if you're in Ohio, to join the Veterans Court Committee for the AG Task Force. And Judge Loxley, if you could maybe put that in the chat, information, how to maybe contact Carolyn Bevins. You can join that committee. They meet every quarter. They discuss all sorts of things on veterans. They're working on a new peer mentor program. They have presentations. It's a good way to get connected. But like if you're in Franklin County going to school, you can contact the Veterans Treatment Court here. You just have to just Google it and contact the court itself, the bailiff, and say, hey, I want to get involved. How can I help? I'm a student. So those are different ways you can actually get involved. And also I wanted to make the students aware, your School of Psychiatry is a major leader on veterans treatment issues. Dr. Phan heads your School of Psychiatry. He actually grew up in Vietnam. He and I were ironically in Vietnam around the same time. He was a child then, and his father was a surgeon, and they fled after several attempts, fled South Vietnam and came to America. And he has worked in the VA system, so he is very knowledgeable. And he and I, of course, really bonded over our heritage overseas. But they lured away from the University of Utah, doctors and Dr. Bryant, husband and wife, and all their team. And they have a major center on post-traumatic stress disorder in the School of Psychiatry. And then I believe it's the Department of Health is running the TBI work in the research. And then your School of Engineering has a big veterans program on prosthesis and things like that they're trying to design for veterans who have lost limbs and that. So there's things happening. I've been trying in different ways to get all those groups connected at your university because it's like a big city. And I've been working with Dr. Niedermeyer and Dr. Phan and trying to do so. But you've got those resources. And if you want to get involved, just go to your own School of Psychiatry and talk to your docs, Dr. Bryant, and say, hey, I want to know more. I want to get involved more. And they can certainly figure out how to connect you. So that's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Wood or Judge Loxley, any more thoughts on that?
If I may add this, and I agree certainly, Justice Stratton, with everything you said. Each county, as I mentioned earlier, all 88 counties in Ohio has a Veteran Services Commission, and they are there for the veterans population in that jurisdiction. And so each county has one. There's a board. Generally, there are 5 members, sometimes more, but the 5-member board, they serve for 5 years, and then they rotate each year. A new board member comes in, or the old one is reappointed to that position. But that is a good source. They have a full-time executive director and staff, depending upon how big the county is. But that's a good resource to say, look, I've heard about veterans treatment courts. Has the jurisdiction here considered anything like that. And that kind of gets the ball rolling, at least from the veterans' perspective, because I think most of the Veterans Services Commission have heard of veterans treatment courts, and it's just a question sometimes of generating enough interest in the community, as well as other factors concerning, time and location and effort and money and so forth. But that can also get the ball rolling.
Thank you.
I put in the chat the link to the website for the Veterans Treatment Court Committee, and it also lists other committees that are a part of the Attorney General's task force. So if you have any interest in any of those committees, you can certainly reach out to those individuals to get involved.
Yeah, we have committees on law enforcement, juveniles, aging, probation and treatment, specialized dockets, several different issues. So you can, if you don't want to just work on veterans, but you want to work on something else, it's a great way to get connected with people in the community. It's a great way to start laying sort of a resume, put that on your resume. It's sometimes impressive that you're a member, because you could join the committee and attend them, and they're all virtual meetings, so it's easy to attend. Any other questions? Well, I'm going to throw it back to Dr. Niedermeyer to perhaps say some closing comments to the students.
Again, I just want to express my gratitude. That was a wonderful presentation, and I appreciate your efforts to inform us all about the justice system, and certainly important in the work we do. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll be back again in a few months. Thanks. Bye-bye.